Here is a question that most of us never think to ask, but once you do, it lingers like a riddle you can't unhear. If the voice in your head wasn't yours, would you still trust it? But neuroscience and philosophy now suggest that a huge part of what you hear inside isn't coming from you at all. Your mind might actually be ghostwriting your reality, stitching together thoughts from culture, memory, and algorithms, making you believe they're you. Think about that for a second. Every time you hear yourself thinking, commenting, judging, planning, regretting, what if that inner voice isn't really you? We walk around assuming our thoughts are private, original, and self-generated. But pause for a moment and really listen. Who is speaking when your mind says, "I'm not good enough," or "I can't do this," or even, "I'm amazing"? Is that your authentic self, or an echo chamber of everything you've ever heard, read, feared, or hoped? We treat our internal monologue as sacred, as the essence of who we are. But the truth is, most of us never stop to question its origin. Neuroscience is the scientific study of the nervous system, including the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. It explores how these systems work to produce thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And here's where it gets really strange. Neuroscience now tells us that a large percentage of our thoughts appear spontaneously, without conscious intention. They just show up. You don't plan your next thought, do you? It appears like a whisper from nowhere, but then automatically you identify with it. You say, "This is my thought," and boom, it becomes part of your reality. But what if your mind is more like a radio than a narrator? A receiver, not a generator, picking up signals from memory, emotion, culture, trauma, even your phone notifications, each layered into a convincing stream of consciousness that you mistakenly call me. In this conversation, we're going to gently but thoroughly unmask that inner voice. We'll explore what science says about thought generation, how ancient philosophies have always seen the mind as a tool, not an identity, and how your social environment might be scripting your internal dialogue more than you think. We'll move through the wisdom of Buddhist teachings, the implications of quantum physics, the symbolic influence of culture, and even the role digital algorithms play in shaping your sense of self. But let's be clear from the start. This isn't about shutting down the mind. It's about seeing it clearly, becoming the observer instead of the echo. So here's your first invitation. The next time your mind speaks up, ask, not aggressively, not skeptically, but curiously, who said that? And more importantly, who's listening? Let's begin the unraveling. The narrative illusion and how brains ghostwrite you. Ghostwriting is to write something for someone else who then takes credit for it. In this video, I'm suggesting that the mind or brain is creating thoughts that you then claim as your own, but their origin isn't truly you. Most people walk around carrying a silent assumption that their thoughts are self-authored, that the stream of words playing in the mind is somehow a reflection of a solid, singular me. But here's the twist. What we think of as our internal narrator may actually be more like a ghostwriter, stitching together borrowed lines from culture, memory, language, and even unconscious habits. Cognitive science is an interdisciplinary field that studies the mind and its processes, including perception, thinking, memory, and learning, often drawing on psychology, linguistics, artificial intelligence, philosophy, and neuroscience. Cognitive science has revealed something startling. The brain doesn't produce thought in a tidy, conscious sequence. Instead, it works like a nonlinear film editor, splicing together fragments of memory, sensory input, and expectation to generate what feels like a coherent story. This process is central to what Thomas Metzinger describes in the ego tunnel, a term that doesn't just sound sci-fi, but genuinely reflects the illusion we live inside of. The ego is not a thing we possess, it's a virtual interface, a constructed perspective that simplifies the overwhelm and complexity of the world into a digestible experience. It's not false, but it's not the whole truth either. Thomas Metzinger is a German philosopher known for his work on the mind, consciousness, and the self. In his book, The Ego Tunnel, he argues that the self is not a real entity, but a constructed mental model, or tunnel, that the brain creates to represent reality. Sam Harris once asked a deceptively simple question. You are not controlling the next thought that emerges in your mind. So where is the author? That's a question that rattles the foundation of the ego illusion. If you're not the one choosing your next thought, how can you claim to be the thinker? This is where philosophy meets social psychology. Sam Harris is an American philosopher, neuroscientist, author, and podcast host. He often writes about topics like consciousness, free will, ethics, and religion from a scientific and skeptical perspective, questioning conventional ideas about the self. Pierre Bourdieu's notion of habitus explains how social conditioning becomes embodied, how our thoughts, preferences, and even inner language are shaped by our cultural context, long before we ever become aware of it. You're not just born into a family, you're born into an entire symbolic system: norms, stories, pronouns, rules of expression that begin scripting your sense of identity from day one. And language, it isn't neutral. Pierre Bourdieu was a French sociologist and philosopher. His concept of habitus refers to the deeply ingrained habits, skills, and dispositions that we possess due to our life experiences, particularly our social and cultural background. It shapes our perceptions, thoughts, and actions, often unconsciously. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols and their interpretation. It examines how meaning is created and communicated through language, images, gestures, and other forms of representation within a culture. Semiotics shows us that every word carries cultural weight. Your inner voice isn't just narrating, it's interpreting your life using symbols handed to you by society. So when your mind says, "I failed," or "I'm unlovable," it might just be translating a collective belief into personal pain. It's wild to consider, but your internal monologue, the thing you've trusted as you, may in fact be a collaborative screenplay written by evolution, culture, media, and memory. And you, the real you, might not be the narrator at all, but the one quietly listening behind the words, the observer, the witness. And that subtle shift from thinking you're the voice to realizing you're the awareness behind it is the beginning of real freedom. Now let's step through a more unusual lens, one that bridges science and spirituality. Let's look at how quantum physics and Buddhism might be pointing to the same strange truth, that the self we think is so solid might not even exist. Quantum physics is a fundamental theory in physics that describes the properties and behavior of matter and energy at the smallest scales, such as atoms and subatomic particles. It introduces concepts like superposition, particles existing in multiple states at once, and the role of the observer. Buddhism is an ancient Indian religion and philosophy based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. Key concepts include the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, impermanence, suffering, dukkha, and the idea of no self, anatta. Quick pause here. If exploring these ideas is sparking something for you, please subscribe and hit the like button. And sharing one quick thought in the comments helps this conversation reach more people. Thanks for your support. Now back to the video. Remember, you are born spiritual. The quantum mirror, physics, Buddhism, and the vanishing self. Imagine looking in a mirror that reflects not just your face, but your very existence, and finding nothing solid looking back. That's the unsettling but enlightening space where quantum physics and ancient Buddhist teachings intersect. At the heart of both lies a quietly radical idea. The self we cling to is not a stable entity, but more like a flickering event, a mirage generated moment to moment depending on observation. Bruce Rosenblum and Fred Kuttner are physicists who wrote the book Quantum Enigma: Physics Encounters Consciousness, to explore the puzzling relationship between quantum mechanics and consciousness, suggesting that observation by a conscious being might play a role in collapsing quantum possibilities into definite outcomes. Quantum mechanics is another term for quantum physics, the branch of physics dealing with the behavior of matter and energy at the atomic and subatomic levels, where classical physics breaks down. In the book Quantum Enigma: Physics Encounters Consciousness, Rosenblum and Kuttner explore a strange phenomenon in quantum mechanics. Particles behave differently when observed. Until they're measured, they exist in a state of possibility, multiple potential realities stacked together. But once observed, they snap into one version of reality. What collapses the possibilities into a single outcome? The observer. And that raises a philosophical bombshell. Is consciousness not only aware of reality, but somehow entangled in its creation? The doctrine of anatta, or no self, is a central teaching in Buddhism, particularly Theravada Buddhism, which states that there is no permanent, unchanging, independent self or soul, Atman, existing in living beings. Instead, what we perceive as the self is a temporary collection of physical and mental components. Buddhism has been whispering this truth for over 2,000 years. The doctrine of anatta, or no self, teaches that the idea of a fixed identity is an illusion. There is no enduring essence behind your thoughts or actions, just momentary conditions giving rise to experience. Thich Nhat Hanh called this interbeing, the understanding that everything exists only in relation to everything else. Thich Nhat Hanh was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, peace activist, and author. He was a globally influential figure in the mindfulness movement and taught extensively on the concept of interbeing, emphasizing the interconnectedness of all things. You are not separate from your breath, your ancestors, your culture, or the earth beneath your feet. You are an ever-changing pattern in the field of life. These aren't just abstract ideas. They point to something directly observable in your own experience. Watch your thoughts closely, and you'll notice they don't arrive in a flowing stream. They flicker. They appear in discrete bursts, sometimes with gaps between them, just like quantum events. And here's the kicker. You can't predict what the next one will be. You don't know where it will come from or even what form it will take. That gap, the space before a thought arises, is where witness consciousness lives, silent, still, untouched. This recognition dissolves the illusion of continuity. We cling to the ego, saying, I am a story. But what if there is no story? Only spontaneous pages appearing in a cosmic scrapbook. This realization isn't meant to disorient you. It's meant to free you. You are not the character being written. You are the awareness noticing the script, the screen on which the movie of mind plays. The teachings of the Vimalakirti Sutra capture this perfectly. The self is like an illusion, like a dream, a shadow, a reflection. And just like quantum waves, it only seems solid when you're not paying attention. The teachings of the Vimalakirti Sutra is a popular Mahayana Buddhist text that features the lay practitioner Vimalakirti, who demonstrates a profound understanding of emptiness and non-duality. It emphasizes that wisdom and liberation are not limited to monastics and explores the nature of reality and the bodhisattva path. So the next time you try to pin down who you are, try this instead. Don't answer the question. Watch it dissolve. Because in the space where identity vanishes, something more profound begins to shine through. Not the ego, not the story, but the field of awareness itself. Let's look now at how society helps script the very language of our inner world and why even our most private thoughts might be cultural performances. Scripts on the skin, Butler, semiotics, and social identities. Let's imagine for a moment that your thoughts were written on your skin instead of whispered in your head. Every belief, doubt, label, and inner sentence visible for the world to read. You might notice something unsettling. Much of what's written there didn't originate from within you. It was written onto you by society, culture, even algorithms. Judith Butler is an American philosopher and gender theorist. In Excitable Speech, she examines the power of language to injure and to perform identities, arguing that identity is not something fixed, but is performatively constructed through repetitive acts of speaking and being recognized within social norms. Judith Butler, in her compelling book Excitable Speech, makes a bold but vital claim. Identity is always a performance with no originality. What we call I is often just a role we've rehearsed so well we forget we were ever cast in it. From the way we say I'm a success to I'm not lovable, much of this self-description follows scripts we've absorbed through repetition. Our gender, our tone, even our inner affirmations. All of these are shaped by the codes we've learned to repeat. This is where semiotics comes in, the study of signs, symbols, and how they create meaning. Every word we think and speak carries layers of social imprint. For example, when your mind says, I should be more productive, that thought likely isn't coming from some deep, eternal truth. It's more likely echoing a capitalist work ethic encoded in the media, school systems, or family expectations. These are what French semiotician Roland Barthes called myths, socially constructed ideas dressed up as universal truths. Even the language your mind uses to describe itself, emojis, hashtags, self-labels, is often imported. These signs don't just express who we are, they form who we think we are. A teenager scrolling through curated posts on social media may begin to unconsciously rehearse not just outer behavior, but inner thought patterns modeled by influencers. The mental narrator begins mimicking the cultural signals around it. That voice in your head? It might be half you and half the algorithm. French semiotician Roland Barthes was a French literary critic, essayist, and semiotician. He analyzed how signs and symbols in culture, including language, fashion, and food, create meaning and often perpetuate societal myths, ideas that are presented as natural or universal, but are actually culturally constructed. This is why Butler's work is so important. She shows that identity isn't a static object. It's a script written in response to societal pressures, and it's repeatable, which means it can also be rewritten. That's the power of awareness. When you catch the inner dialogue repeating a cultural trope, like real men don't cry or I'm too old to change, you can stop, look closer, and ask, who benefits from this thought? Is this my truth? Or a viral meme that's taken up residence in my mind? From the perspective of spiritual psychology, this awareness practice is profound. The more you observe these mental scripts, the more you recognize that the voice in your head often speaks in someone else's accent. It's not your essence, it's your conditioning. And once you realize that identity is performative, not inherent, something incredible opens up: the freedom to choose new performances. You're no longer a character locked into a single role. You can switch scripts, speak new lines, or even, in moments of stillness, say nothing at all. Now let's explore how far back this scripting goes, into the ancient wiring of our tribal minds and the digital personas we now wear like masks. Tribal brains, digital personas, and the evolution of the ego. Long before we curated digital avatars and cultivated our personal brands, we were huddled around fires, watching each other's eyes for cues, decoding tone, posture, and silence. The modern self, the one you think is speaking in your head, has ancient roots. It was shaped to survive in tribes, not tweets. And understanding this matters because your ego didn't begin as a storyteller. It began as a protector. Matthew Lieberman, in his fascinating book, Social: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect, explains that the brain treats social rejection as physical pain. That's how hardwired our need for belonging is. The ego then evolved not just to help us survive lions or starvation, but to keep us in the good graces of our group. Matthew Lieberman is a social neuroscientist. In his fascinating book, Social: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect, he explores the evolutionary and neural basis of human social behavior, arguing that our need for social connection is as fundamental as our need for food or shelter, and that the brain is specifically wired for social interaction. It narrates constantly to ensure we're behaving correctly based on the rules we've internalized over time. This survival mechanism grew more sophisticated, learning to wear masks appropriate to each environment. At work, you're polished. With friends, relaxed. Online, curated. But behind each of these is the same ego desperately working to keep you accepted. Slavoj Žižek once said, "The truest obscenity is the obviousness of the self." In other words, what feels most real about you is often the most socially constructed. We rarely question how much of what we think or feel is just an ancient strategy playing dress-up in modern clothes. The fear of being disliked? Ancient. The urge to post the perfect selfie? Just a digital update of that primal script. Evolutionary psychology reveals that when the ego feels threatened by rejection, change, or failure, it doesn't become more flexible. Slavoj Žižek is a Slovenian philosopher and cultural critic. Known for his complex and often provocative analysis drawing on Lacanian psychoanalysis, Marxism, and popular culture, he often critiques the illusions and ideologies that shape our sense of self and reality. It hardens like a turtle under stress. It retreats into what's safe and familiar. This is why disidentifying with the ego feels so hard. It's not just psychological, it's evolutionary. The voice in your head telling you not to speak up, not to be different, not to change. That's an echo from the Paleolithic warning: don't get exiled. But here's the glitch in the system. In a hyper-connected world, the tribal brain gets confused. The algorithm becomes the new elder. A like becomes approval, a trend becomes law, and suddenly your internal narrator begins speaking with a voice trained not by wisdom or soul, but by digital feedback loops. What was once about survival now becomes about validation, and the ego, ever the shapeshifter, adapts again, becoming not just a voice, but an influencer. So here's the key insight. Your ego is not naturally fluid. It's adaptive under trust, but under threat, it clings to identity like armor. The task, then, isn't to kill the ego, but to see through its reflexes, to question its motives, and to remember that its oldest programming is based on a world we no longer live in. The ancient self model was built to protect you, but the modern world asks something deeper. It asks you to see through protection and into presence, and that's where transformation begins. Paleolithic is the early period of the Stone Age, a prehistoric era characterized by the development of the first stone tools. In this video's context, It refers to the ancient evolutionary period during which core human survival instincts and social behaviors developed. The journey into reshaping your inner narrator is just beginning. In Part 2, linked right here, we explore the surprising science of neuroplasticity and epigenetics, showing how you can actually edit your inner autobiography in real time. Click the video on screen now to continue this exploration. If you found value in this part, please support the channel by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement means a lot. See you in Part 2.